So for more on the political impact ahead of the midterms, let's bring in Democratic strategist and former New York State Senator David Carlucci and Republican strategist Malik Abdul. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Malik, we'll start with you. So we're now 12 days into the war. President Trump is claiming victory in Iran. He was in Kentucky, we know, downplaying concerns on rising costs. But Republican Senator Rand Paul is warning that the midterms could be disastrous for your party if this war continues. I'd like to listen to some of what he said.
I think the 2026 elections already, we are behind the eight ball as far as the electoral process. I think if you add in high gas prices, high oil prices, and if we are still bombing Iran with kinetic action, people don't want to call it war, but if there's still kinetic action that causes oil to be over $100, I think you're going to see a disastrous election.
All right, so Malik, what kind of impact do you believe this war could have on the midterms? Yes, they're not till November, but should Republicans be worried?
Well, I think that Senator Paul, he really hit it out the park here in addressing some of the concerns that Republicans should be having. I don't think that the war in and of itself is something that's going to ultimately change the direction of the midterms one way or the other. As we know, Democrats are supposed to win at least one of the two houses of Congress. Whether or not that happens is really up in the air because of the Democrats, their own unpopularity. But I do think that Republicans, it's, you know, as much as people talk about whatever the divisions are within MAGA or, what's going to split the base, I think the biggest thing for Republicans is to be concerned about momentum. It's not about a split. It's about momentum. And we have to be concerned about messages that drive voters to the polls. And right now, we're not doing enough of that.
And David, I do want you to respond because, we've already seen Democratic wins in elections and special elections. And as we know, Malik even alluded to it, their midterms do tend to be tough for the party currently in power. So are the midterms, from your perspective, a slam dunk for the Democrats? Are they going to take this all the way to the end in the face of this war and these rising prices?
Yeah, well, nothing is a slam dunk, right? So we can't have that false security. And I think that's a trap that Democrats could fall into because, yes, Donald Trump is doing all the right things to help Democrats. He's going against the things that he campaigned on. He did not lower prices. He did not get us out of foreign entanglements. He's done actually the opposite. And we could cite statistics and different economic indicators, but the most important economic indicator is when someone gets their grocery bill at the Piggly Wiggly and it's more than it was last month, or you go to the gas station and you're paying more than you did earlier this year, that's a problem. And every penny that energy bill goes up, that gas bill goes up, that is a problem for Republicans. And even more so is the fact that Donald Trump refuses to address this issue. He even calls affordability a hoax, fake news. There's no empathy, and that's a problem. You can't declare mission accomplished when U.S. military is dying. You can't call mission accomplished when energy prices are soaring. That is not empathetic. It's not addressing the real concerns of Americans. It's kitchen table issues. And I think Americans want to hear, President, what are you doing to make my life better? Not that you've already solved all these problems. And when you hear the president speak, you hear him talking like everything is done and he's accomplished all he set out to do. That's a major miscalculation for the Republicans, and I think that's going to lead to Congress getting turned over to the Democrats.
So, David, we're going to stay with you. Democratic Senator John Fetterman kind of forging his own path, saying he supports this war, but he is opposed to a ground operation. I want to listen to that.
My red line is boots on the ground. For me, boots on the ground means, nation building. Secretary Hegseth has said, it's never going to be parts about nation for that. I truly don't understand why Democrats can't even acknowledge that this has made the world more safe and more secure.
All right. So Fetterman, they're also pushing back against some of his fellow Democrats' criticism of the war, of the president's actions. What are your thoughts? Do you think the senator there is on an island, or could we see more Democrats potentially get on board with that criticism?
I see where the senator's coming from, but it is hard to get behind that when we just don't see the facts equating to that the world is safer. Yes, we'd like to believe that the Ayatollah that was there and wanted to do harm to America and other countries is gone, but we have no guarantees and no real plan that there's going to be new leadership in Iran. We don't know the extent of the weapons of mass destruction, if we can call it that, where they were and how capable they were. Donald Trump is just saying, hey, trust me, don't ask questions. And if you ask questions, that's a problem. No, we want America to succeed. We all want peace in this world. It's that old adage, trust but verify. We want to have trust in our government. We want to have trust in our president, but we need to verify this. We need to see the facts. And I hope Senator Fetterman is right, but it's hard to believe that when we hear about the Strait of Hormuz being shut down, when we hear about Donald Trump and others saying, well, tankers, just go for it, just do it. Well, it's not your life on the line that might be shot or sunk in a ship. So it's easy for you to say that, but the realities are different. And all of this contradicts what the president is saying. He has administrative officials saying different things, different reasons why we're at war with Iran. That lack of clarity is a problem. And as energy prices continue, as military deaths continue, that's more and more problems for Republicans that don't see a way out of this. That old adage, you broke it, you bought it. But Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. He wants to break it and then possibly leave or maybe be there forever. The president is not giving us any definitive terms, and that's a problem.
All right, so Malik, back over to you. So while the president was in Kentucky yesterday, addressing Americans, voters there, he did go after Republican Representative Thomas Massey, who we know has been very publicly critical of the president, of the GOP, when it comes to foreign wars, domestic spending, the handling of the Epstein files. I'd like to listen to some of that.
We got to get rid of this loser. This guy is bad. He's disloyal to the Republican Party. He's disloyal to the people of Kentucky. And most importantly, he is disloyal to the United States of America.
Okay, so again, Malik, we are seeing, these soaring gas prices. The economy is the #1 issue for Americans. Do you think the president is using these stops to address affordability for all Americans, or is it more about campaigning and maybe talking to his base?
Are you asking me, is Donald Trump disciplined enough to focus on the economy and everything that is White House? Are you really asking me that? Well, of course, Donald Trump isn't that disciplined. And the White House, I've talked to people around the White House and on Capitol Hill, and they do wish that Donald Trump would focus on those things. The administration itself really is focusing on that. You've heard Donald Trump over and over again, whether that was the State of the Union speech or even a number of the speeches thereafter, where he talks about the things that his administration is doing to address the economy. But I think the biggest problem that we're going to have is that Donald Trump is the biggest voice that we have out there right now. Some of his criticisms of Thomas Massey, I actually agree with. And I think that Thomas Massey enjoys playing this role when it comes to Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, Congressman Massey is extremely popular in Kentucky. And I'm not convinced that it's a good idea for Donald Trump to back candidates. And in this case, with the Kentucky, the guy who's running against Thomas Massey, he was against Donald Trump. But we've kind of seen this with Donald Trump over and over again, where he's willing to embrace people who were against him, against those who've actually been in Congress working on behalf of the American people. But at the end of the day, the midterms are coming. I do think that the Democrats are probably going to get the House. The Senate is much less certainty when it comes to the Senate. But we still have work to do, because at the end of the day, affordability will be on the ballot. And if Republicans don't address that, we're just going to have a problem, whether that's Kentucky, Texas, or Louisiana.
Malik Abdul, David Carlucci, my thanks to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be with you.